I'm Addison Martin, and I have selected an American figure from our history that is known by many people. I'm going to present the life story and legacy of George Washington and talk about his historical legacy here in the 21st century. All of the information I'm presenting about George Washington is from a website called The Biography of George Washington by Biography.com editors. George Washington is an American figure in history who is known for leading the Continental Army to victory in the Revolutionary War, as well as being America's first president. He led many troops through wars and battles, and he realized he had a passion for being a leader and mentor, which led to him being selected for president. George Washington died at age 67. He remains to still be known today. Even as generations went on, his achievements are still talked about. I believe he is controversial today because of slavery and how he supported it. He owned hundreds of enslaved people, and today it raises public disagreement. Washington's backstory. Washington's father, Augustine, was an ambitious man who acquired land and enslaved people, built mills, and grew tobacco. Augustine married his first wife, Jane Butler, and they had 3 children. Jane died in 1729, and he married Mary Ball in 1731. Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was the oldest of 6 children, all of them who survived into adulthood. The family lived on Pope's Creek. They were members of Virginia's middling class. In 1735, Augustine moved the family to the Potomac River to a Washington family home in Mount Vernon. Washington's family held some distinction in England and was granted land by Henry VIII. In 1738, the family moved to Ferry Farm on the Rappahannock River, where Washington spent most of his youth. Washington's family. Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a widow who was only a few months older than him. Martha brought 2 young children to the marriage, John, which is known as Jackie, and Martha, which is known as Patsy. Jackie was 6 and Patsy was 4. Washington had great affection for the both of them, and was heartbroken when Patsy died before the Revolution. Jackie died during the Revolution. Washington's early life. From ages 7 to 15, Washington was homeschooled and he studied with the local church, and later he became a teacher in practical math, geography, Latin, and the English classics. He worked with woodsmen and plantation supervisors. By his early teens, he had mastered growing tobacco, stock raising, and surveying. His father died when he was 11 and became the ward of his half-brother Lawrence. Lawrence had inherited the family's Hunting Creek plantation. When Washington was 16, he traveled with a surveying party plotting land in Virginia's Western Territory. The following year, he received a nomination as the official surveyor of Culpeper County. Washington's brother Lawrence died of tuberculosis, making Washington the heir apparent of the Washington lands. Lawrence's only child, Sarah, died 2 months later, and Washington became the head of one of Virginia's most prominent states, Mount Vernon. These experiences ultimately made him resourceful and made his mind and body stronger. It also awakened his interest in Western land holdings, an interest that lasted throughout his life, with hypothetical land purchases and a belief that the future of the nation lay in colonizing the West. Washington's midlife. In August 1755, Washington was made commander of all Virginia troops at age 23. He was sent to the frontier to protect nearly 400 miles of border, with some 700 colonial troops and a Virginia colonial legislature unwilling to support him. Quote, "It was a frustrating assignment. His health failed in the closing months of 1757, and he was sent home with dysentery. In 1758, he returned to duty on another expedition to capture Fort Duquesne. A fire incident took place, killing 14, wounding 26 of Washington's men. The British were able to score a victory, capturing Fort Duquesne. Washington decided to retire from his Virginia regiment in December 1758. Quote, his experience during the war was generally frustrating, with key decisions made slowly, poor support from the colonial legislature, and poorly trained recruits. End quote. On June 15, 1755, he was appointed Major General and Commander-in-Chief of the colonial forces against Great Britain. Quote, Washington was the best choice for a number of reasons. He had the prestige, military experience, and charisma for the job, and he had been advising Congress for months. End quote. The darkest time for Washington and the Continental Army was during the winter of 1777 at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Over the next 6 months, they suffered thousands of deaths, mostly from disease. Washington's late life. A near rebellion was avoided when Washington convinced Congress to grant a 5-year bonus for soldiers in March 1783. It worked to his favor because that decision basically ended the war. The Americans won their independence, and he then resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Army. Quote, in November of that year, the British had evacuated New York City and other cities, and the war was essentially over. End quote. For 4 years, he attempted to fulfill his dream of resuming life as a farmer, but in 1787 he was called to the duty of his country. In 1789, at the Constitutional Convention, Washington was unanimously chosen as president. Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton had come to the conclusion that amendments were not needed, but a new constitution was. Quote, a new constitution that would give the national government more authority. End quote. In March 1797, he turned over the government to John Adams and returned to Mount Vernon, determined to live his last years as a farmer. On a cold December day in 1799, Washington spent his time on the farm on horseback in a snowstorm. The next morning, December 13th, he awoke with a sore throat, which eventually led to him feeling very sick late that night. The illness worsened until he dies on December 14th, 1799. Interesting facts. He was the only president in American history to be elected by unanimous approval. Washington used false teeth or dentures for most of his adult life. His dentures were made from human teeth, including teeth from enslaved people and animal teeth. George Washington was known for his leadership and bravery, which led the Continental Army to victory, as well as leading our country. I believe he will be talked about for many more generations because of his major accomplishments that made important milestones in history. George Washington was a hero and a legend in his time. Today, in the 21st century, I think he would still be considered a hero because of his amazing achievements. Even though some people do not agree with some decisions he made, George Washington made a huge impact on our country.